Yes, go ahead.
State your name, sir.
Dennis Ray Carter, Jr.,
And how old are you, Dennis?
15.
You go to school?
Yes, sir.
What grade are you in?
Not.
Where do you go to school?
Marion,
Where do you live?
Highland Trailer Park.
Highland Trailer Park? In relation to Jessie Misskelley's house, where do you live? No
We'll
house.
just walk across the street. Right across the road.
Right across the road?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want you to think back to May the 5th of last year. Okay. Do you remember seeing Jessie Misskelley that afternoon?
Yes, sir.
What do you remember about seeing him?
Right after school, and me and him walked them down the road, and then I didn't stay with him all through, you know.
Okay, so you weren't with him all afternoon?
No, sir.
Were you with him off and on, or what?
Just off home.
Okay. Do you remember a conversation with Jim McNeese?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you tell me about that conversation?
He said,
Your Honor, I object. He's asking for him to respond in terms of hearsay.
Mr. McNeese has already testified about the conversation, Your
Your Honor, it
Honor.
doesn't matter if Mr. McNeese testified or not. He can't get up here and testify to what someone else may have or may not have said. That's hearsay.
I'm going to sustain the objection to hearsay. He may state he was present,
Okay.
that he heard a conversation,
All right.
period.
Do you remember a conversation with Jim McNeese?
yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember Jim McNeese talking to you?
Mm-hmm.
Who else was present when Jim talked?
Jesse.
Okay. What was the nature of the conversation about?
About wrestling.
Okay. Did you have any intentions at that point of what you were going to do that night?
We was going to go to the wrestling.
Okay. Did you relate that to Mr. McNeese?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember if you went wrestling that night?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay. Do you remember who went?
Jesse, Freddie, Johnny, and me.
Is that all that went, or
Yes, sir.
you sure that's all that's went, or you think, or what?
I think there could have been some more people.
Okay. Did y'all go wrestling several different times?
Yes, sir. We went on.
Why do you remember this night that you went wrestling?
Because I remember I did stay on my statement that I remember going that day, and then I started thinking about Jim McNeese, and that brought my. You know.
So it's the conversation that Jim McNeese that really ties us down.
Yes, sir.
That's your point of reference?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, do you remember giving a statement to the police on, looks like it was June 22nd? Maybe no, it was on June 9th, sorry. One statement, it looks like the police interviewed you twice. Do you remember that?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember, do you remember talking to the police?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Have you thought since then about what you told them?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What's your opinion as to whether you were correct?
I wasn't correct.
Okay. Are you sure?
Yes, sir.
You understand you're under oath now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Has what happened on May 5th become an important day to think about and remember?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you positive that what you're testifying today under oath is correct?
Yes, sir.
Now, I want to ask you, do you know Vicky Hutchison?
Yes, sir.
Has she ever bought you any alcoholic beverages?
Yes, sir. A lot of times.
Your Honor, I object to this question. It's totally improper. I ask that the jury be admonished, even disregard their asking. That's totally improper.
Your Honor, that goes to the credibility of Mrs. Hutchison.
Your Honor, if he wants to open the door as to alcohol, drugs, things of that nature, we'll be glad to jump in there with him.
You want to open that door?
I would draw the question, Your Honor. One second.
Mr. Carter, do I understand? Let me make sure that I've got this right. Your birthday is February 6th of 78.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and you're the same Dennis Carter, let's see, talked with Officer Diane Hester of the West Memphis Police Department back on June 9th of 93.
Yes, sir.
And that would have been about 6 days after Jessie Misskelley's arrest. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would have only been approximately 31 days or 30 days since the murders themselves. Correct?
That's not correct.
Well, the murders occurred on May 5th.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you talked with the police as early as June 9th. Is that correct?
Yeah, I talked to him, yeah. I
Okay.
don't know really what day it was, but I talked to him.
Okay. Well, you don't remember what day that was?
Yeah, I know. It was in June.
Okay. And that was the first time you talked to him, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
Have you had a chance to look at this statement that you gave the police back on June 9th?
This ain't my handwriting.
Okay. Look at the last page and see if that's your signature.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you remember talking with a female officer with the West Memphis Police Department, Diane Hester?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you gave her a statement on June 9th about what you knew about this incident, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now point to me where in that statement you mentioned that you were with Jessie Misskelley on the day of these murders.
I'm going to object, Your Honor. He's already responded that.
Your Honor, this is
Correct on that
cross-examination.
Overruled.
Point to me where on that statement you told Officer Hester just 6 days after the arrest and a little over a month after the murders that you were with Jessie on the day these murders occurred.
I was mistaken then.
Well, is that in there anywhere in that statement?
No, sir.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay. Now you did tell Officer Hester that Jessie states that about a month ago, Jessie told him that Damien was a devil worshiper. Didn't you tell that to Officer Hester?
No, sir.
Your
I
son.
didn't say nothing about no Damien.
Okay.
I don't even know that boy.
Well, can you read this part that's highlighted in orange right there? If you would, read that aloud for me, please.
States that about months ago, Jessie told him that Damien was a devil worshiper and that he ate the right leg off dogs. Jessie said that this happened in the woods located behind the leaf lamp.
Okay. And your testimony is that when Officer Hester wrote this down and you signed that statement that she just made that up, that you never told her that?
No, sir, I didn't say that.
Okay. So Officer Hester just flat lied and put something in here that wasn't accurate.
Well, I didn't say that.
Let me show you, by the way. Is this your signature on the side of that statement, that very page of that statement?
Yes, sir. But I didn't read everything on this paper.
Did you read part of it?
I just skimmed through it.
Oh, okay. Now, and this was Officer Hester's handwriting. It's your signatures, but her handwriting, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you're up there again to give a statement on the 22nd of June, correct?
I don't really know what date it was.
Okay. Well, I'd like to show you a statement dated the 22nd of June, 3:27 p.m. Now, whose handwriting is that on that statement?
Oh, this is mine.
Oh, cool. That's yours. Well, good. Show me on that statement where you tell the officers that you were with Jessie Misskelley on the afternoon of Friday the 5th. Now, you've had a whole week to think about it since you talked to her before, correct? A little over a week, right? At this point?
I wasn't really thinking about it when I talked to her.
So you hadn't thought any about the fact that Jessie Misskelley is in jail for these murders?
Oh, I know he didn't do it.
Now tell me where on that statement you mentioned to the officers that you're with Jessie Misskelley on Wednesday afternoon, May 5th.
I don't say on there.
In fact, read to us what that statement does say in regard to being with Jessie Misskelley wrestling.
Read this word. It says orange lines.
Read the statement. It's one paragraph. Just read us what you told the officers that day.
This one here.
Just read us the entire paragraph and let us know what you said.
Okay. I went to Dice 1 or 2 times, but it was after the 3 little boys was murdered. I have
Now,
never.
let me stop you there. You told them that you hadn't, that the times you went to Dice had been on 3 occasions, but it was after the little boys had been murdered, correct?
I told you a while ago. It was
Okay, is that what you told the officer on June 23rd and wrote it in your own handwriting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, now read the next sentence.
I have never went with Jessie to Dice. Can I read some more?
Okay, what'd you put down next?
The time I went to Dice was with Kevin and Johnny and Freddie and Bo, and with Johnny's girlfriend. Can you read on?
Yeah.
It was on Friday night, but Jessie did not go with us. Kevin lived out in Holland Trailer Park with Johnny. Freddie lives out in Lakeshore, so does Bo. Freddie and Bo are brothers. Johnny's girlfriend lives in Holland also. I don't know Kevin and Johnny. I don't know their last names, and I don't know Freddie or Bo's either. Read on.
What does the last sentence say?
Okay, it says he usually goes on Mondays or Fridays.
Okay, when you say he, who are you talking about?
I was talking about Jessie then, but I wasn't thinking.
Okay.
I was nervous.
Okay. And when you said he usually goes on Mondays and Fridays, you were referring to going wrestling, right?
Yes, sir.
And you've got one of those yellow ribbons on. What does that stand for?
That I love little Jessie. I want him to get out.
Was anybody down at the police department coercing you or threatening you or doing anything to make you write out this handwritten statement on June 22nd?
No, sir.
You talked with Jessie Misskelley Sr. about May the 5th and about what happened on that date, talking about what you recall about that date?
No, sir.
Never talked to him at all?
No, sir.
Talk to anybody about your recollection about May 5th and what occurred, and where you were, and what went on that day?
No, sir.
And that's as true as everything else you told
That's
us?
true.
Do you understand you're under oath today?
Yes,
Sir,
sir.
I object. That's an improper question. He's asking every witness. I assume every witness that takes a stand understands you're under oath.
Your Honor, I think after the attack he just made, that's a proper question.
Your Honor, that's not a proper way to rehabilitate a witness.
Any event.
The witness can be reminded that he's under oath and whether or not he's telling the truth.
Are you telling the truth today, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. That's all.
Anything else? All right, you're free to go.
Could you please state your name for the court?
Fred Revelle,
And where do you live, Mr. Revelle?
805 South Porter, Stuttgart, Arkansas.
Okay. Do you remember where you lived back on May the 5th of 1993?
Yes, sir. I lived in Lakeshore.
And do you have any independent recollection of May the 5th?
Yes, sir.
How can you tell the jury how you can remember that day as opposed to any other day?
Because Kevin Johnson, one of the guys that went to wrestle with us, he was at a search and rescue meeting that night. So he didn't get to go wrestle with us and practice that night.
Is there anything else about May the 5th that makes it stand out in your mind in relation to any other event?
Just that Keith Johnson, Kevin's brother, that's the only night that he went with us. That he ever went with us and wrestled there.
Okay. Did anything happen prior to May the 5th that helps you recall May the 5th?
My birthday, May 2nd, I was at guard drill. And I was telling everybody at guard drill about us wrestling up there that night. I believe we went there that night, and Kevin Johnson went with us that night. And then 3 days later is when we went back up there, and Kevin didn't go.
Did anything happen on May the 6th that helps you relate to May the 5th?
Yes, I heard about them finding the boys the next day, and Kevin went in there May 5th, and he had been at search and rescue meeting.
Were you going to Diaz on a regular, I guess it's Dice, is that how you pronounce it?
Dice.
Were you going there on a fairly regular basis?
Yes, sir.
And why were you going to this particular place?
Because they had a ring there. That's where I trained to wrestle at. My father trained me there, and I knew the ring was there.
Okay. Were you making any arrangements to purchase a part of this building, or?
I was buying a ring from Charles Stone.
Okay. Do you remember seeing the defendant, Jessie Misskelley Jr., on May the 5th?
Yes, sir.
And do you know about what time that was?
We all met at Kevin's house. Every time we went, we'd all meet there, because that was the central area where everyone lived that went with us. And he was there. He rode with us that night. We met Keith at the old Exxon station on Highway 63, I believe.
Is there anything about the time that you left that would make you remember what time it was?
It was starting to get dark at first. In my first statement, I said it's about 5 or 5:30, but it was getting dark
When you left Highland Trailer Park?
Yes, sir.
With Jessie Misskelley Jr.?
Yes, sir.
And did you all go straight to Dice, or did you stop somewhere in between?
We stopped at the Exxon station to meet Keith, and me and Bill Cox.
Let me stop you right there for a minute, Mr. Revelle. When you say this Exxon station, where is that located at?
I believe they call it Lake David.
Lake David?
Yes, sir.
Where is it located as far as a road or a town is concerned?
Highway 63, I believe, on old highway going towards Dice.
Okay. And who did you meet there at this old Exxon station?
Keith Johnson.
And who is Keith Johnson?
Kevin Johnson's brother.
Okay. And what happened after you met him?
Bill Cox didn't trust his car to drive all the way to Dice, so he parked his car, and we exchanged vehicles. And Roger Jones and Jesse got out of the car with Zella Adams and Johnny Hamilton, and got in the car with Keith. And me and Bill Cox got in the car with Dennis Carter, I believe, and Johnny Hamilton and Zella. So there'd be room. He had speakers in the back seat. Me and Bill Cox was going to ride with Keith too, but he had speakers in the back seat, so we all couldn't fit in there.
So where did you go after you left this Exxon station? There.
We went straight to Dice.
Okay. Who all was with you? Who all went with you that night?
Roger Jones, Dennis Carter, and Jessie Misskelley, and Johnny Hamilton, Zella Adams.
You mentioned Keith.
And Keith, he was with us that night.
And that's who you met.
That's
at
the only
Exxon
night
station.
he ever went with us.
Did anything happen that night at Dice that helps you remember that particular night?
Just that Kevin went in there, and he was going every time we went.
Did anything happen to the defendant that helps you remember that night? And was there a time during the night, the time that you left West Memphis, you said it was just about dark, until the time you got back at 11:30, that Mr. Misskelley was away from the group or away from you?
No, sir.
He was with you the entire time?
Yes, sir. We'd all sit out in front of the building at Dice, wondering where Kevin was, questioning him, because he said he was going to be there as soon as he got out of search and rescue meeting.
Okay. Excuse me. You mentioned earlier that you had given a previous statement to the police.
Yes, sir.
You remember what you told the police?
I told him that that night that I had paid some money to Charles Stone. But later I found out that that wasn't true. We were all sitting around talking to Charles Stone one night, and he said that.
Your Honor, at this point I object. He's getting ready to go into hearsay.
Sustain.
You can't testify what someone else may have told you.
Okay.
You can testify as to what you believed or about the incident with regard. Why were you giving money to Mr. Stone?
To pay for the ring that was in this building.
And you thought that you had given him some money that night?
Yes, sir.
Is that true?
No, sir. I later found out that was false.
Pass the witness.
Mr. Revelle, I'm going to have a number of questions for you, and if you don't understand my questions, you just please ask me to rephrase them, and I'll be more than glad to do so.
Yes, sir.
And in exchange, I'd like you to respond to my questions, okay?
Yes, sir.
And you've indicated that you previously gave a statement to police, right?
Yes, sir.
And in fact, you sought out the police to tell them that you knew for certain that Jessie Misskelley was with you on the 5th.
Yes,
Isn't that
sir.
right?
Yes, sir.
And you told the police then that the reason you were absolutely certain, and you told them a number of times in your statement, was because you had paid $300 and signed a contract the day that you were with Jessie on the 5th. Isn't that right? That's
Yes,
what
sir.
you told them.
Yes, sir.
And in fact, when you talked to police, you had gone down to talk with this Mr. Stone and confirm with him that there had been money exchanged on the night of the 5th. Is that right?
Yes, Charles Stone had told me that night,
Go on.
May 5th.
Did you go down there and confirm that with
No.
him?
At least let him answer.
He didn't ask for a hearsay, though. Go ahead.
Did you go down there and speak with Mr. Stone to confirm that?
No, I
He's not
called.
asking you what he said to you. He just asked you if you went down there.
No, I called him on the phone.
Okay? And you told police, you told Mr. Stone, you told everybody back on June 9th, the reason I remember it was the 5th is because that's the night we paid $300, right? That's
Yes,
what you
sir.
told
That's
them.
what I had said.
And you didn't say anything about this bunk about it being your birthday, did you? You didn't say anything about that, did you?
No, sir.
Okay? And you didn't say anything about a car breaking down and so being at search and rescue or anything about that, did you?
Yes, sir. I said something about Kevin Johnson being at a search and rescue meeting.
You didn't use that as a basis of determining when it was you were there.
You most certainly did, Your Honor. It's in his statement.
Is that an objection?
Your Honor, if he's going to
Is that an
impeach him,
objection? Make an objection if you want to make an
Your
objection.
Honor, if he's going to impeach him with a statement, you ought to at least
Your Honor, if
do
he's
it
going to...
correctly.
What is your objection?
Your Honor, my objection is improper impeachment.
All right, confront him with his statement. Allow him an opportunity to refer to it.
Now, the receipt, and I'm going to show you a copy of a receipt. You told the officers, you said, we paid $300, and that's why I remember it was the 5th, because we went down there. In fact, you and Bill Cox went down there and paid him the money, right? That's what you told the officers?
Yes, sir. And
Okay. Now, I want to show you a receipt. And does that receipt have your name at the top?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You're Fred Revelle, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And does that receipt reflect that you paid Charles Stone $300?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what date does that receipt show?
April 27th.
Okay. And April 27th was a Wednesday too, wasn't it?
Yes, sir.
It was just a Wednesday the week before these murders occurred, right?
I'm not really sure. I have to look at that calendar.
Well, you know in fact that you told police that the night we were there was the night I paid them the $300. That's what you told police, correct?
That's what I said.
Okay. And the truth in fact is the night that you paid $300 was a week before the night of the murders.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, just to go back over what you told police, do I understand correctly that when you talked and gave a statement to Detective Bill Durham, that you indicated that whatever night this was you say you went down there, that you left about 6:30 to 7.
I never said that.
I'm not, that conversation was tape recorded, correct?
That we left from the building at Dawes to come home or to go up there.
Officer Durham says, now what date was that? And your response, it was May 5th, the day of the murders, around 7 o'clock, 6:30, 7 o'clock. We'll look at that part highlighted in pink down here.
We left to go to Dawes 6:30, 7 o'clock.
And you told him it was May 5th, but you also told him it was the day you paid $300, right?
Yes, sir.
And you also told him y'all were getting high on the way down there, correct?
No, sir, I sure didn't.
Does it not say, and did you not tell Officer Durham, I'm training him to be a pro wrestler, teaching him, we left and picked up Jessie in Highland Trailer Park, and we were going to get high on the way up there?
No, sir, I sure didn't.
So if Officer Durham and the tape recorded statement reflect otherwise, you would disagree with that?
Yes, sir, I sure would. I don't do drugs. I don't mess with anybody who does drugs.
And you also told the officer when you were talking with him and you were trying to get your time straight, you said it was around 6:30 or 7 because the times hadn't changed yet, correct?
No, sir, I don't recall that.
Well, he said, Officer Durham asked, it was already dark? You said, yeah, when I left. And he says, Highland Trailer Park? And you said, yes, sir, the time hadn't changed yet. It was already dark. When you said the time hadn't changed yet, were you talking about going to daylight savings time?
All I know is it was dark when we left.
But you would agree that you told him that you hadn't switched to daylight savings time on the time you left, correct?
I don't recall saying that.
Okay. And daylight savings time would have been in effect on May 5th of 1993.
I don't have any idea. I don't recall making that statement.
Now, is this a copy of that contract that you also talked about signing? Let me exchange that. Here's one that's already been marked. Your Honor, marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 103.
Yes, sir, this is the contract we signed.
Okay, now show me where Fred Revelle signs that contract.
Right here, second line.
Okay. Okay. Now, is there a reason why Mr. Stone wasn't able to determine who Fred Revelle was?
Because of my wrestling name,
Huh?
I guess.
What?
I guess because of my wrestling name.
Oh, so the guy you were entering into the contract with up there, he thought your name was Fred James, didn't he?
He only knew me as Fred James.
Okay. Are there any other names that you go by?
No, sir.
And the other people that signed that contract, are they people that accompanied you there to the wrestle match?
Those are people that went to the building with us to practice.
And you indicated to police that this contract and the receipt were done on the same night, correct?
As far as I can remember.
Okay. And you will agree that that was April the 27th, correct?
All the people didn't sign the contract on the night that we gave the money. Only me and Bill Cox was going at the time.
And so it's your testimony that this contract was not signed all at the same time?
There people getting like he signed later on because he wasn't going with us. He came on a different night, so he signed it later on. There's other people that started coming with us later on. Some didn't even sign it.
Well, now, you were anxious to tell police that because of this $300 paid, you could show that Jessie was there with you on the 5th, right?
Charles Stone told me that we gave him the money on May 5th.
Okay, but Charles Stone didn't tell you that till you called him and were trying to ask him and try to make up a determination as to why you were there on the 5th.
I knew he was there.
Okay, was your answer? He didn't tell you that till you called him and tried to pick his brain to determine
No,
when
I
that
didn't
money
try
was
to pick
paid.
his brain. I was asking him to see if he could recollect his memory to that night.
Okay, and so then you tell the police that it's all connected to this $300 payment, and you found out after that that $300 payment was made on April 27th, didn't you?
It was made at an earlier date. Yes.
Okay. And so then when you come back and formulate this new theory as to why you're there on May 5th, when was it you went and told the police about this new theory you formulated?
I never talked to the police after that.
You never told this to the police?
No, sir.
You're wearing one of those ribbons. How long have you known Jessie Misskelley Jr.?
I've known him. Can't tell exact years how long I've known him. I've known him for a while. We lived in the same trailer park.
So you first come to police to give them information about where he was on the 5th, and when that proves to be wrong, the next theory you come up with, you keep it all to yourself till you walk in here and testify in court, correct?
It's not a theory. It's the actual truth.
But it sure is, your memory sure has improved a whole lot over the months than what it was back in June when you gave this statement, back on June 9th when you gave the statement to Officer Durham. Isn't that right?
I could recall events that happened on different nights, but I had to think about it more. I jumped the gun when I went and made that statement. I knew that he was there.
But it wasn't just like the police called you into the office and under the pressure you weren't able to recall. You went out and actively searched for information and went to the police with the information you knew to be accurate in an effort to come up with an alibi for Jessie Misskelley, didn't you?
Your Honor, how long is this going to continue? He's asking
Do you have an
questions
objection?
over and over. Yes, Your Honor.
What is the objection?
It's improper impeachment. He's asked him 3 or 4 times.
Overruled.
He's answered it 3 or 4 times.
Overruled. Avoid repetition, however.
Check that handwritten. Isn't it true that during this time period y'all were going to dice 3 or 4 times a week?
Or more.
Or more? And you had been for how long? Over a month?
I don't really know. I met Bill Cox and we started going pretty regular from there.
Okay. Well, had you been going for a month, 2 months, 3 months prior to the time, prior to May 5th?
No, sir. It hadn't been that long, maybe a month.
Okay. And you continued to go after May 5th, right?
Yes, sir.
So, during a month's period of time, y'all would go down there 20 some odd times?
Or more.
Okay. And you've been doing it for a couple of months by the time you talked to police, right?
Yes.
So there've been 40 some odd trips down there? Is that
I
correct?
can't recall no actual numbers of the times we went down there. I didn't have no reason to count how many times we went down there.
No reason to really pay much attention as to what one night from the next, did you?
There were events that happened certain nights, and then I had to recall my memory to actually remember the nights that it took place.
Okay, now, this is your signature on the end of this statement, is that true?
Yes, sir.
And this is a statement, is that your handwriting?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you hand wrote this statement, looks like to Officer Durham back on June 9th, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Been about 6 days after Jesse's arrest.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and show me in that statement where it was you told the officer that you could recall that evening because that's the evening that so-and-so, Kevin or Keith, was at search and rescue? Just take your time and read that. When you get to that point, point it out to me.
I don't see it anywhere in this statement.
It's not there, is it?
No, sir.
In fact, what's in this statement is about the $300 that was paid down. That's why you knew it was the 5th, right?
That's what I thought at first.
And you never bothered to tell anybody any different until you come in here with your yellow ribbon and testifying in this courtroom today.
That's right. I figured the police would
No
want to get
further
in touch
questions,
with me.
Anything else?
Mr. Revelle, is there any doubt in your mind that Jessie Misskelley is with you for about 7
I object to leading. It's his
Board
witness.
leading.
He's leading.
Was Jessie Misskelley with you that night, May the 5th?
Yes, sir.
Any doubt in your mind?
No, sir.
Nothing further.
I wouldn't put my life on the
All right,
line
you
for
may
something.
stand down.
No, we would like to introduce the receipt. I have the original here. He's already identified a copy of it.
All right, it may be received.
What number is that?
102. Yeah, move for introduction. State's Exhibit 101.
What is that?
No, 103.
103 the contract.
Any objection?
I'll take a look at it, Your Honor.
Sure. You can stand down. You're free to go. All right, they may be received without objection.
Your Honor, we'd ask to exhibit these to the jury.
All right. Call your next witness.
You've already been sworn. State your name, sir.
Roger Jones.
And how old are you, sir? Can you sit?
19. 19.
19? Okay, where do you live?
Highland Trailer Park.
Where did you live on May 5th?
With my aunt.
Okay, was that in Highland Trailer Park?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In connection with Jessie Misskelley's house?
About 5, maybe 6 trailers down.
You know which way?
I think it's south, across the street anyway.
Okay. Do you remember the day of May 5th?
Yes, sir.
Why do you remember that day?
We went to wrestling and dice that night.
Okay. Why do you remember? Did you go wrestling other nights?
No, sir. Just I went one other time, but that night too.
Okay. Why do you remember this is May 5th as opposed to another date?
Because we heard about it a couple months later. A couple days later, I mean.
What'd you hear about?
You're going to have to speak into the microphone. I can barely hear you here.
The boys come up missing.
Speak
Okay,
up.
so I'm sorry.
I can't hear him.
Can you just scoot up toward the mic, sir? Okay, so you heard about the boys coming up missing?
Yes, sir.
And that's why you remember this being the day?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember the first time you saw Jessie on that day?
About 5:30.
Where'd you see him?
He was outside, and I was going to my other aunt's house.
Okay, not the aunt you're living at?
No, sir.
Okay, where's this thing, the house you were going into, where was it in relation to Jessie's house?
Right in front of his trailer.
Okay.
Across the street.
Do you remember who was with him or anything?
No, sir.
Okay. Were you paying attention to,
No, sir.
what were you doing?
I was going in the house
Okay. When was the next time you saw Jessie that day?
at 7 o'clock when he come down to my aunt's house.
Okay, this same aunt, this the one you living at or the aunt?
The one I'm living at.
Okay, so that's the one 5 or 6 trailers down.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And what happened when he got there? You can't tell what Jessie told you now, but
Yeah.
okay, what happened when he got there?
We sat there for a little bit and talked. Then we got up and went down to Johnny Hamilton's house.
Okay. How long did you sit and talk?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. And what were you doing at Johnny Hamilton's house?
Waiting for a guy by the name of Bill to get there.
Okay. And then what were y'all going to do?
Go to Dice.
Okay. Did you go to Dice?
Yes, sir.
Who went with you?
It was me, Lil Jessie, Freddie Revelle, Keith Johnston, Bill Cox, Dennis Carter, Zella, and Johnny Hamilton.
Okay. Did Kevin Johnson go?
No, sir.
Okay. Do you remember why he didn't go?
He had a rescue meeting that night.
Okay. Did Keith Johnson leave with y'all from the same place?
No, sir.
Where'd you meet up with Keith?
At the Tyron to Jonesboro exit at that old Exxon station.
Okay. When you what cars? When you got to Tyronza, whose car did what?
Me and Jesse rode with Keith in his car. Little Dennis, Fred Revelle, Bill, Zella, and Johnny rode in Johnny's car.
What about Bill's car? What happened to it?
We left it.
Object to the lady, it's kind of like the script that they're following. He asked a question
Your Honor.
about the car.
I'm asking an opening question. What happened to the car? He can respond that it went, it didn't went. He can respond it blew up. Whatever happened, he can tell the story.
Your Honor, when he asked the question, it presumes something happened to the car, and this witness can certainly testify about events that occurred without being prompted.
Avoid leading.
Yes, Your Honor. What time? Do you remember what time y'all left?
It was anywhere from 7:15 to 7:30.
Okay. And do you know what time you left Dice coming back?
11:15
That's when you left or when you got back?
when we got back.
Okay. What did you do at that point?
Well, me and Jesse was with Bill Cox and Fred in his car, Bill's car, and they let us out, and me and Jesse went to my house.
Okay. This is the one 6 or 7 trailers down?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What happened next?
We sat down there. He sat down there and talked to me and my cousin till 12 o'clock, and he went home.
Is there anything important about 12 that made him want to go home at around 12?
Because my aunt always come home at 12 o'clock.
Okay.
She got home about 5 minutes after.
I have a moment.
Mr. Jones, when was the first time you talked to the police and told them this story?
I haven't talked to him.
You have not talked to the police?
No, sir. I talked to a undercover cop about a week ago.
Oh, so he's not police?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you have talked to the police?
Yes, sir.
All right. And so about a week ago was the first time you ever told anybody with law enforcement about this?
Mm-hmm.
All right. All right. Now, when you said that the reason that you remembered this was because you went wrestling, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you went wrestling one other time?
Yes, sir. Before
Okay.
that.
Before that? When was that?
I think it was on. I think it was April something, but I'm not for sure of the day.
Okay. Well, but you remember vividly May the 5th because
Yes,
you
sir.
went wrestling.
Yes, sir.
But you don't know the date you went wrestling before.
No, sir.
Okay, who'd you go with the first time?
With Johnny Hamilton,
Who else?
Dennis Carter,
Who else was there?
Freddie Revelle.
Anybody else?
I think little Jesse was there.
Okay. And those were the only 2 times you went?
I went one other time after that.
When was that
holiday. It was a holiday, but I can't exactly remember what holiday it was.
Okay. The time that you went on a holiday, you remember going, but you don't even remember what the holiday was.
No, sir. I know it was on a Monday. That's all I remember.
But you remember May the 5th, right?
Yes, sir.
Isn't it true that you told the police that you remember, you know it was May the 5th because you signed the contract saying you wouldn't sue anybody that day?
Yes, sir.
Right? All right. Thank you. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 103 and ask if you recognize that.
Yes, sir.
Is that the contract you signed?
Yes, sir.
All right. Take my pen here and put you a little red star by where your name appears. All right. And when did you sign it that night?
Well, I signed it. You had to sign them every night.
Every night?
Yeah, well, I signed one twice when I went.
Well, if you signed them more than once, what is it that's magical about signing a piece of paper that makes you remember it's May the 5th?
Because 3 days before that, it was also Fred Revelle's birthday.
Oh, it was Freddie Revelle's birthday 2 days before. But you didn't say that was why you remembered in your statement.
No, it wasn't. The reason I remember it is because I heard the next day or the day after that the boys come up missing.
All right, well, just a few minutes ago, you said that...
I said that too,
You said what?
that the boys come up missing.
Yeah,
I
you
heard
said
about
something about you knew because we heard... And you said we heard it was about a month and a couple of days later.
I said a couple days later.
Didn't you say a month and a couple of days?
I said that, and then I said no, it was a couple days later.
Okay, so you did say a month, and then you changed it,
Yes,
right?
I changed it.
All right.
It was either the next day or the day after.
But what you told the police, let me show you your statement. You recognize that?
Yes, sir.
And that's in your handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
And what you told the police was that you knew it was May the 5th because you signed this contract. Right? But you're now saying that you signed the contract more than one day that you went wrestling. I don't have any further questions, John.
Anything else?
Yes, sir. Were there any other times you were wrestling where some boys turned up missing the next day?
No, sir.
Was there any other times you were wrestling where Keith Johnson went?
No, sir. That was the only night I went.
Thank you.
Wait a minute. Anything else? Nothing.
On the contract, you signed below Kevin Johnson's name, right?
Mm-mm.
You didn't?
Kevin wasn't there. Yeah, Kevin wasn't there when I signed it.
Okay. But you signed, your signature on that's right below Kevin Johnson's name, isn't
Because you all signed on the same piece of paper.
it? Jesse's is right above Kevin Johnson's, isn't it?
I don't know why.
I don't have any further questions.
All right, you may stand down.
Court ready to proceed, Your Honor? Could you please state your name for the court?
Keith Johnson,
And where do you live, Keith?
Mark Tree, Arkansas.
Do you have any independent recollection of May the 5th, 1993?
No, sir, not really.
Okay. You remember ever going wrestling with some people in Dice?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell the court and the jury about that?
Well, that afternoon, one afternoon, my brother called me and asked me if I wanted to go to wrestling school. I said, yeah, I'll go. So I said, what time you want to meet him? He said, meet him at Lake David, that old Exxon, about 6 o'clock. So I said, okay. So about that time, I got ready to go, and I went there, and I got there about 6 o'clock, and I had to wait because nobody showed up, and I was waiting to get in
Okay,
Dutch.
let me stop for just a second. Are you telling the court that you don't remember exactly what the date was that this
No, sir.
happened?
No, sir. Don't know the
Okay.
date.
Okay, continue, please.
And well, I got to Lake David, and I was sitting there waiting about 6 o'clock, and then nobody showed up, so I just stayed around for a while. It was getting dark by the time everybody showed up.
Okay, who showed up?
Well, that's one thing I don't remember all the people's name that was there.
Was that the first time that you had met
Yes,
some
sir.
of these people?
That's the first time I met all of them besides Johnny Hamilton.
Well, Mr. Hamilton was the only one that you were familiar with.
That's the only one I knew.
Okay. Was the defendant, Mr. Misskelley, there that night?
Yes, sir, he was.
Okay. What happened after they arrived?
Well, they asked me if a few of the guys that could ride with me, and I said we only had room for 2 because I had some big speakers in my back car, and I couldn't fit nobody in the back seat. So Jesse and another guy, I don't remember his name, got in the front seat with me, and then another guy, one of them parked their car, and we took off to Dice.
Did anything happen? I assume you went straight to Dice there?
Yes, sir, we went straight to Dice.
Where did you go when you got to Dice?
We went to this, right there, I think it might be in town, at a big wrestling building, looked like an old theater or something.
Okay. Mr. Misskelley was with you?
Yes, sir. He rode right beside me.
Did anything happen that night to Mr. Misskelley?
Yeah, we sat after sitting there just wrestling around for a while. He was outside on the floor, and then somebody got out and tried to throw him back in, and he hit his head on the ring. And then after that, he sat out from wrestling for the rest of the night.
What time did y'all leave Dice that night?
I don't remember exactly what time it was, but I got to my house a little after 10 o'clock that night.
Okay. Do you remember reading or hearing about the 3 boys were missing
No, sir.
in relationship to that time?
No, sir, I didn't hear about it till like 3 or 4 days later. Because I don't watch much news at night. I just watch sports and stuff like that.
And you can't remember specifically what the date was this night that you went wrestling
No,
out?
sir, I can't remember.
How many times have you been to Dice?
Once.
Pass the witness.
Mr. Johnson, you have no idea when this happened, do you?
No, sir, I sure don't.
Okay. Could have been April. I mean, you don't have any idea, right?
All I know is the night when my brother called me. He was supposed to show up. He did not show up because I asked him where he was. And
He didn't
said,
show up at all?
He didn't show up at all because he had to go to a rescue meeting or something that night.
Okay. Well, your brother's been in search and rescue for a while, right?
Yes, sir.
In fact, back in January, he was in search and rescue, right?
I don't know. I was probably in school in January.
Okay. Well, they meet a couple times a month, don't they?
I don't know nothing about it.
You don't know anything about it. So, well, if the proof showed that your brother went a couple times a month to search and rescue, it could have been any one of those times, couldn't it?
I guess, but I don't. In January, I was in school in January, so.
Okay. Well, I'm not suggesting you went wrestling in January. I didn't mean to suggest that. The point I'm getting to is you don't have any idea when this happened, do you? That
No,
you're
sir.
talking about. Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Would you state your name for the court?
Sir,
Would you state your name for the court, please?
Kevin Johnson.
And where do you reside, Mr. Johnson?
Sir,
Where do you reside?
what
Where do you live?
in Highland Trailer Park, Marion?
What do you do for a living?
I'm an iron worker.
Okay. Do you know the defendant, Mr. Misskelley?
Yes, sir.
How do you know him?
He lives right next door.
Okay. And when you say right next door, does that mean behind you or beside
Beside.
you? Okay. Did he live beside you back in May of 1993?
Yes, sir.
Okay. His parents still live there, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember May the 5th, 1993?
Yes, sir.
And how do you remember that?
I was at a search and rescue meeting.
You're a member of the Crittenden County Search and Rescue Squad?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Do you remember anything else about that night?
Well, I was supposed to went to the wrestling, and I called, and I didn't make it to the wrestling that night because I went to the meeting.
Did you talk to your brother that day?
I believe it was that day.
Okay. Do you remember Mr. Johnson having a discussion with Mr. Misskelley shortly after the murders took place?
Yes, sir.
What did you tell him?
I was.
Your Honor, I'm going to object to the hearsay.
Your Honor, I'm asking this witness what he told.
Still hearsay, Your Honor.
No, it's not, Your Honor. If the witness is testifying what he told the defendant, it's not hearsay.
Your Honor, it is still an out-of-court statement made by a declarant.
All the witness can testify about what he told somebody else.
Question again, let's see what you're trying to get him to do.
Did you have a discussion with Mr. Misskelley, the defendant, shortly after the murders?
You can answer yes or no to that.
Yes, sir.
And could you tell the jury what the nature of that conversation was, what you told Mr. Misskelley?
Our objection is to hearsay.
Your Honor, I don't believe that it's hearsay.
Wait a minute. I'm gonna allow him to state what he said to Mr. Misskelley.
Thank you, Your Honor. You tell the jury what you told Mr. Misskelley?
Yes, I told him that one of the boys were beaten and castrated.
You told him that one of the boys had been castrated?
Yes, sir.
What else did you tell him? Did you tell him anything else?
Yes, that they was tied with the shoestrings.
And where did you get this information, Mr. Johnson?
Heard it from the members of the search and rescue.
Did you tell Mr. Misskelley anything else?
I can't recall.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? That's the witness, Your Honor.
Now, as I understand it, on May 5th, you were at a search and rescue meeting.
Yes, sir.
You don't know where Jessie Misskelley was on May 5th, do you?
No, sir.
And you don't know who may have gone wrestling and who didn't, correct?
Sir?
You don't know who went wrestling and who didn't, from
No,
your
sir.
own knowledge.
No, sir.
Okay. Now, you indicated that you gave some information regarding the injuries to the children to who?
Sir?
You gave some information regarding the injuries to the children to who?
Jesse?
Who else did you tell about this?
Nope. I mean,
By Jessie, you talking about Jessie Senior or Jessie Junior?
Junior or senior?
what are you asking?
Okay, what, you indicated that you gave some information to Jessie Misskelley. Is that Jessie Misskelley Junior or senior?
Oh, Junior.
Okay. And did you tell anybody else that information?
Well, we was, talking about it. Who was around.
Did you talk about it other places to other people?
Oh, no, sir.
Nobody, you wouldn't have told anybody else about that, right?
Who was standing there.
Well, did you talk about it on other occasions?
No, sir. I can't recall. It was in the papers and everything.
Okay. So you basically told him what was in the paper?
And what I heard at the search and rescue, because I wasn't at the scene.
Okay, so you weren't at the scene and you didn't have any first-hand knowledge, correct?
No, sir. Right.
Okay. And so basically what you were relating to him was the same stuff you'd been reading in the paper?
Right. And what I was told, what I had heard.
And you didn't know which one or if all of the boys had had their genitals removed, correct?
Right.
Okay. And you certainly didn't know which one had, correct?
Right.
You certainly didn't tell Jessie that, did you?
No, sir.
Okay, so if Jessie knew which one had had that occur to him, he wouldn't have gotten that information from you. True?
Right.
I'd like to show you what is a Crittenden County Search and Rescue attendance record. Does that see your brother's name there?
My brothers?
Or your name? I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how many times a week does that reflect that you attend those meetings?
The first
I'm sorry.
first and third Wednesday of every month.
Okay. So you've been attending those meetings 2 times a month for how long?
January the 20th was a year.
Okay.
I'm sorry, did you say the first and the third Wednesday?
Yes, sir.
You recall, Mr. Johnson, you told Jessie about some of this general information that you'd learned in the paper. Did you?
Your Honor, that's not what the witness testified to.
You told him some general information about the injury. You remember anything else you told him about any injuries?
No, sir.
Okay. So the extent of what you would have said would have been something to do with castration type injuries, correct?
Yes, sir.
Anything else that you would have told him?
No, sir.
Didn't mention to him about injuries to the ears, anything like that?
No, sir.
Didn't mention to him anything about signs or injuries or indication of sexual abuse?
No, sir. I can't recall.
No further questions, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Thank you, you're free to go. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Were you sworn this morning? Were you sworn this morning?
Yes, sir, I was.
Come on around.
Just
state your name for the court?
Ronald L. Lax.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Lax?
I am a private investigator.
And where do you reside?
Memphis, Tennessee.
And you have an office in Memphis, is that correct?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay. Now approach the witness, Your Honor. You recognize those photographs, Mr. Lax?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell me what they are?
They are photographs taken in the vicinity of the crime scene. Monday was a week ago.
I'm sorry?
Monday was a week ago.
Okay. And do those crime scenes accurately depict the distances from the crime scene where the bodies were recovered to the interstate highway?
They are taken from where the bodies were discovered facing the highway, yes, sir. Facing I-40.
And will it help you explain the measurements from where the bodies were recovered to the interstate and the service road?
Yes, sir. In a straight line from where the bodies were.
Let me offer this.
Your Honor, we would at this time enter our objection. The reason we object is these photographs taken 2 weeks ago. I think everybody's aware that the difference of a wooded area in January or December is markedly different than what it is in May, the first week of May. And if he here testifies to the distance between where the bodies are and where the service road is, I think we'll stipulate to that measurement. He can testify to that measurement, and the jury can look on this diagram and see how far it is based on the scale on that diagram. But to put these pictures in is going to give an incorrect perception of what those woods appeared like, because that's in January of 1994.
Don't we have photographs of that particular scene at the time?
I'm not aware of any photographs, Your Honor, that have been introduced that depict these angles.
I'm asking, do we have any photographs from those double trees that depict the foliage and the ground conditions and the circumstances as they were immediately after or in close proximity to the discovery of the bodies? And Mr. Lax, could you not make that same observation from photographs more contemporaneous with the
Yes, sir, I
event
think I could.
itself? All right.
Your Honor, the purpose of the photographs is to show whether or not you can see the interstate and the service road from where the bodies were recovered.
Your Honor, that's the very reason we object, because whether you can see that in January and whether you can see it in May is two different situations.
Do you have those other photographs?
Looking, Your Honor.
Your Honor, I'll withdraw the exhibits. I think the witness can testify about leaves. I think the jury can understand about leaves and the difference in the different seasons
All
of
right,
the year.
you'll be permitted to withdraw the tender of those photographs.
Mr. Lax, would you step down from the witness box and take a look at the diagram which can introduce some evidence that states Exhibit 13?
Yes, sir.
Are you familiar with the layout of that in that diagram?
Yes, sir, I am.
Can you find the reference trees where where you made your measurements from?
Right here.
Okay. And can you tell the jury how far it is from that reference point to the service road?
From here to where the service road is, where the asphalt starts, it's 516 feet in a direct line. Now there's a path that wanders there, and it's probably the path that's longer.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. There is a path from here to the service road, and if you follow it, it's longer, but in a direct line, it's 516 feet.
Now, standing down inside the ditch bank, which would be here, down in the creek bed itself, is it possible to see the service road and the interstate?
Your Honor, I object to that question, because as far as we know at this point in time, the only time he's been out there has been in January of this year, or when these photographs were taken, and definitely, depending upon what time of year it would have an effect on whether you can see.
I'm gonna let him qualify the question with respect to the time of the year that the witness might have been in that position to view the roadway.
Your Honor, I think the testimony will reveal that it doesn't make any difference what time of the year it is, because you're so far down in the ditch that you can't see anything. That's the point that I'm trying to make.
Go ahead.
Mr. Lance, is it possible to be down in the creek bed and look to the service road and see the service road?
No, sir.
Now, if you were standing up on the bank, let's say right here alongside the creek, can you see the service road in the interstate?
When I was there a week ago, a little over a week ago, you could. But that, like Mr. Davis said, is in January, and there are no leaves. So it's possible that I was there in August when there were leaves, although I wasn't there for that express purpose. It is heavily foliage in that area. I don't know whether you could during the summer or not. In January with the leaves off, you can.
It would be very difficult to do that in the summer.
It's difficult in January. I think it would be even more so in the summer.
Absolutely.
No question, Jeremy.
You're free to go.
Thanks, sir.
Call you next week. Have you been sworn? Okay, raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in the matter now pending before the court, so help you God. How long have you been in the courtroom, sir? I saw you get up to the back. Was it just for the last witness?
Yes.
Just been here since noon? Mm-hmm. All right, you may proceed. Come on around.
Could you please state your name for the court?
Marty L. King.
And where do you live, Mr. King?
I live in Forest City, Arkansas.
Where did you live on May 5th of 1993?
In Crawfordsville, Arkansas.
And where is that located at?
8 miles this side of West Memphis and Marion.
Okay. Where were you employed on May the 5th of 1993?
I was employed for Bojangles Restaurant on Missouri Street.
Okay. Were you on duty on the night of May 5th, 1993?
Yes, sir, I was.
And did anything unusual happen on that night?
Yes, sir. There was something unusual that happened that night.
Now, this was the night of the homicides, is that correct?
Well, I remember reading about it in the evening paper that the boys were missing.
Okay. Tell the jury what happened on the evening of May 5th in Bojangles.
Well, about 9:30 that night, a customer came into the restaurant. It was a lady and her daughter, and they had ordered some food. And being at 30 minutes before closing, I told them that it would take a few moments to get their order prepared. The lady went and said that she'd be right back. She was going to take her daughter to the restroom. And she came back within a minute around the corner. I thought something was wrong, so I asked her. And at that time, she said there was a black gentleman in the women's restroom. I thought that was kind of strange, so I said, well, I'll go check on it. And he was there in the restroom with his head in his lap.
So describe what you seen when you entered the women's restroom.
Well, above the commode on the wall, there was a forearm imprint of blood, along with blood that was around the toilet where the gentleman was sitting.
Did you see anything else besides blood?
Well, I spoke to the gentleman, and he raised his head and was kind of disarrayed. He also had a muddy feet, wet up to his knees, and he spoke, but I just was checking to see if he was all right and asking him to leave the building.
Did he comply with your request?
Well, he said that he was all right, but he did not get up.
Okay. Did he subsequently leave?
He left approximately 15 to 20 minutes later.
What did you do after you asked him to leave?
I went and called the police department to maybe have this gentleman checked out and ask him to leave. With an officer there, someone will leave more freely than just someone asking them to.
Did the West Memphis Police Department respond to your call?
Yes, they did. The officer never got out of the car, just came around to the drive-through window and asked me what the problem was, and at this time the gentleman had already left and was walking.
Okay. Did the officer ever come in the building?
No, sir.
What did you do with the mess?
Well, we couldn't leave it, so we had to clean it up. We drug a water hose around that's as big of a mess as it was in the floor, and proceeded to wash and clean up the restroom.
Did you find anything in the restroom that this gentleman left behind?
Well, in the toilet, he had tried to flush a pair of sunglasses down the...
Now, Your Honor, unless he knows that he actually tried to flush the sunglasses, now it's one thing if the sunglasses are just there, unless he actually knows that he tried to flush them.
Where'd you find the sunglasses?
They were in the toilet.
All right.
Do you have reason to believe that they belong to this gentleman?
Well, they were not in the restroom before he entered. And with the bowel movement that he had all over him, the seat, the floor, and everywhere, there was nothing in the toilet except the glasses when I went in to clean up the mess. So it leads me to believe that he tried flushing it.
Was there anything else that he got blood all over besides the wall and the stall?
Well, he had some blood on a toilet tissue roll where he had tried grabbing for it, and it was discarded in the waste can.
Okay. Did you make an attempt to try to preserve that roll of toilet paper for the police?
No, sir, I did not.
Okay. Did you ever hear from the police again?
After that night, no, sir. Now, an off-duty police officer came into the restaurant the next morning, and that I'm acquainted with, and was getting breakfast. And I told him about it, and we looked at it, and he said, well, just leave it alone. And he left. That he was going to go tell somebody about it.
Did anybody else show up from the West Memphis Police Department to investigate this?
Yes, sir. Later that afternoon, well, that night.
Now, was this on May the 6th, the day the bodies were discovered?
It was around dark because one of the gentlemen was using a flashlight to look around the outside of the building.
Did any of the officers come in and inspect any of the blood or anything?
Yes, sir. They took some samples and scraped them off the door and off the wall in the hallway. Now, what they did with it from there, I don't know.
What happened to the sunglasses and the roll of toilet paper?
The toilet tissue was, like I said, put in the waste paper basket, and it wasn't used, but the sunglasses were taken by the officers.
Okay. Did you tell the officers about the toilet paper roll?
Yes, sir.
May I have a moment, Your Honor? Pass the witness.
Mr. King, now, I believe that you said that the first information that you had that this person was present was somebody came and told you this person was in the women's restroom, is that
Yes,
right?
sir. Yes, sir.
All right. And this person had blood on the wall.
Where he had leaned up against the wall.
Right. There was blood around on the floor, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And didn't you say something about some blood down the hall?
Well, what it was is where he staggered out of the restroom, had grabbed the doorknob. The men's restroom door had some on it, and then the hallway directly right across from the women's restroom.
Okay. And was he bleeding himself?
I could not tell, sir.
Couldn't tell. Okay. So he had blood on the wall, right? Blood on the floor.
Yes, sir.
Blood in the hall, right?
Yes, sir.
So, I mean, there's just blood all over the place.
Yes, sir.
Wasn't there something about it? He had a cast or something on his arm?
Yes, sir. From thinking about it, when I saw him sitting in there, he had a Velcro cast. You can buy them at Walmart, Super D, or wherever. But it was on his left arm.
Is that the arm where the blood was?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, go ahead.
It was blue in color with the white Velcro strips that would fasten it on his arm.
Okay. And where was the blood?
As he was kneeling with his head in his lap, it would be on his right arm that was coming off because it was on that side of the toilet.
Okay. And let's see, was there blood anywhere else besides on the wall of the bathroom, on the floor of the bathroom, on the door, and down the hall?
No, sir, not that I saw.
Okay. And then you cleaned that up?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Are you familiar with where the crime scene is, where the bodies were recovered?
Yes, sir. I used to live in Mayfair Apartments.
Okay. Can you describe for the jury the terrain between Missouri Street, where the restaurant is, and where the crime scene is?
And due east of the restaurant, there's a railroad track leading into the open field, which will come up onto 7th Street there.
This gentleman look like he'd been walking on the street or look like he'd been walking in a field?
Looked like he had been walking in a field that night because there was mud on the bathroom floor along with blood also.
How long would it take someone to walk from the crime scene to Bojangles?
I do not know that, sir. Because the gentleman seemed disarrayed, it could have took him a while or any length of time.
Did the officer who came on the 6th, and that was about 9 p.m. as well, did he have mud on him from being out the crime scene that day?
Yes, sir.
Did they look similar?
Oh, Your Honor, I object to that.
Your Honor, the officer told him that he was at the crime scene all day, and in a previous statement, the witness said there was a similarity between the mud and the dampness on the clothing.
Approach the bench.
You trying to qualify me as a soils expert?
No, I'm just telling you the officer.
Well, I mean, mud looks like mud to me. Well, I mean, what?
I was trying to question.
Okay.
Actually, Mr.
I have another question.
All right.
Could you walk down from the witness stand and take a look at the map and make sure I got it? You recognize that as being a map of West Memphis?
Yes, sir. I noticed some of the streets that are not.
Okay. Can you point to the crime scene and point to Bojangles Restaurant on Missouri Street? You can use this if you'd like. You recognize this as being Missouri Street?
Well, now that you pointed it out, yes, sir.
Okay.
Bojangles is right about in here, the best I can see.
Okay, where would the crime scene be?
It's right back over in here off of Goodwin, because we lived on Macaulay, and that's where the apartments are facing.
So where it says crime scene there, does that help you?
Well, this right here, like I said, it's Goodwin, and we lived on Macaulay, which our apartment faced that ditch. So I know it's right over in there, in that vicinity, yes, sir.
Who passed the witness?
Mr. King, I wouldn't even see where you were pointing to Bojangles. Would you take this orange pen and mark on there?
Well, I'm not for sure exactly where it is, to tell you the truth.
No, just the general area, so I can kind of get an idea where you're.
Right over in there somewhere.
Okay, let me see.
If that's the right direction.
Okay, now you see this ditch right here?
Mm-hmm.
And here's Balfour, and here's Dover right here. There's Dover right there.
So the restaurant comes out at the corner. The red light is at Dover, and Balfour, which is right across the road from the restaurant, kind of angles in behind the Westminster Christian School.
So this general area here is Bojangles, right? Now, between where you've indicated is Bojangles and the area of the crime scene, which is right here. What do you have in between there?
Well, like I said, right behind the restaurant, there's a bunch of open fields that lead up to 7th Street.
All right, and this is 7th Street right here?
Yes, sir.
And is that right here?
Yes, sir.
All right, and that's a major thoroughfare, isn't it, through West Memphis?
Well, yes, sir, that's where the Union 76 truck stops at.
All right, And that would be right here, is that right?
That's pretty close to where it is.
Okay, or maybe right up in here rather. Right, and there's a big overpass over the interstate, right?
Yes, sir.
And then between 7th Street, Bojangles being back here, between 7th Street and the crime scene, what do you have?
On the interstate side of the ditch, like I said, you have Union 76 truck stop,
Right.
Scott's or Love's truck stop, and then a truck wash, which is Blue Beacon.
Okay. So you've got Blue Beacon, you got a truck stop area, right?
Yes, sir.
And those aren't fields, right?
No, sir.
All right. And then you got another truck stop over in here, right?
Well, actually, that's Catfish Island.
All right, Catfish Island, but there is another truck stop in this area, right? There are 2 truck stops in the 7th Street area, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then from after you get past Catfish Island, between Catfish Island and this railroad, what do you have?
Open field.
Open field. So you got muddy fields in there, right?
Yes, sir.
And then on the other side of the interstate, you've got fields here, right?
Yes, sir.
And you got fields in here.
Is that down where Walmart is at?
No, Walmart's way down here. This is at the corner. Here's the liquor store right there.
Oh, okay. Yes, sir.
So you get fields over here, right?
Yes, sir.
And then you get fields back in here, right?
Yes, sir.
And you get fields over in here, right?
Yes, sir, on the other side of the interstate.
Right. And back in here you've got fields, right?
Behind the armory? Yes,
Right.
sir.
And now in behind Bojangles you've got a railroad track, right?
Yes, sir.
And there's a little wooded area with a ditch back there, isn't there?
Yes, sir. The ditch is probably 5 foot deep.
Okay. All right. And and of course, where you got ditch, you got mud, don't you?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have any further questions.
Would you please state your name for the court?
Warren D. Holmes,
And where do you reside, Mr. Holmes?
Miami, Florida.
Okay. Can you tell us a little bit about your law enforcement background, your education and experience?
I was a detective sergeant with the Miami Police Department for 13 years.
Have
I left there to open my own business, and I make my living primarily lecturing various law enforcement agencies throughout the United States, including the FBI, the CIA, Texas Rangers. I've lectured in Memphis, I've lectured in Little Rock on the subject of criminal interrogation.
Okay. I understand that you've also lectured to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Yes, 10 years.
I also understand that you've worked on the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
I worked on the assassination of President Kennedy. I worked on the Martin Luther King murder. I worked on Watergate. And more recently, I worked on the William Kennedy Smith case.
Okay. Were you also involved in the Boston Strainer case and the Hampton case in Louisiana?
Yes.
Mr. Holmes, have you ever been qualified as an expert on police interrogation techniques by any court in the country?
Yes.
How many times would you say you've been qualified as an expert?
Oh, at least 50 to 100 times.
Judge, we'll stipulate that Mr. Holmes is qualified as an expert in the field of police interrogation.
Thank you.
All right, you may proceed.
Mr. Holmes, would you tell the jury approximately how many homicide cases that you've worked on in your career?
I have interrogated a little over 1,200 people who have been accused of the act of murder.
Have you ever taken a false confession from a suspect?
Several.
And could you tell the jury what an interrogator would look for when they are taking a confession that might raise a red flag or be indicative that the person is giving them a false confession?
Well, the first thing that you look for is he's got to tell you something that you don't already know. And the second thing that you look for is that whatever he says does not conflict with the evidence or the crime scene analysis. The third thing, he should be able to lead you to the fruits of the crime or the crime weapon utilized. Now, in the initial part of the confession, It's always in narrative form, where he suddenly just gets it off his chest, and is an indication of relief that sets in. And he tells you about it, and you don't have to prompt him or lead him with questions. He just gets it all out at one time. Then when he gets done telling you in a narrative form, that's when you start asking the questions. Also, what you look for is that when you do start questioning him to clarify certain points in his confession, if you're wrong in a supposition, he will tell you that. He'll tell you, no, that's not the way it happened. He will correct you. You don't have to correct him. And then you always look for little incidental details. And he'll say, well, just at the time this was going down, we noticed a man walking a dog across this field. And later on you verify that there was in fact a man walking a dog across a field. So anytime they supply an incidental detail of an occurrence that took place simultaneously with the crime, it lends credibility to the confession. They will describe the behavior of themselves and of the victims. They will describe their feelings at the time. They will describe the conversations between the culprit and the victims. They will describe the conversations between the co-defendants. They will describe their feelings since the crime has committed. And when they're confessing, you get the impression that their words match the emotion that you see. They're reliving the experience of the crime. Now, if you don't see that match and their manner is stilted, it could be contrived and you could be getting false information. But what you're always looking for when you take a confession is something that you can hang your hat on, something that corroborates a confession. One independent witness, one piece of physical evidence, a statement made by a co-defendant that confirms it. But you're always looking for something beyond his word, just something to verify the validity of the confession. Most of what you see is that the suspect, once he confesses, he sounds and he looks like he's telling the truth. And of course, after you get the confession, the litmus test, the best test, is to take him out to the scene and let him walk you through the crime and see what happens. That's when you can assess whether or not he's telling you something based on memory or he's just fantasizing it as he goes along.
Mr. Holmes, is there a point during an interrogation that the interrogator has to be careful after the suspect has been in there for a while? Is there something that happens that you got to watch for?
Most of your confessions, particularly in homicide cases, come in the fourth hour. There's a waning of resistance where the person becomes a victim of what I call the captive audience syndrome, where he almost becomes mesmerized by the relationship between himself and the interrogators. Anything from 4 hours on, there's a diminishing resistance that can lend itself to a confession, whether it be false or valid.
Have you had an opportunity to examine the statements made by Jessie Misskelley Jr. that were given to the West Memphis Police Department on June 3rd, 1993?
Yes.
And have you had an opportunity to listen to the actual tape of the confession?
Yes.
Mr. Holmes, have you identified any of the factors that you've just discussed in Mr. Misskelley's statement?
Your Honor, excuse me, his point is, I think before he can ask that question, he needs to also address whether or not he's familiar with the investigative file sufficiently enough that he can answer that question.
Here is your objection to foundation.
Yes, sir.
Lay a better foundation.
Mr. Holmes, have you also been made aware of some of the aspects of what was found at the crime scene and what how the bodies were bound and things of that nature?
Your Honor, I would ask that question, I'd object to that question, because when he says I'm made aware, I don't know if Mr. Stidham told him the version or if he's examined actual documents and files, and if he's going to lay a foundation for this man's opinion, he needs to explain to us what it's going to be.
Your Honor, may counsel approach the bench?
Yes.
When we talked about the hearing in Marion, we asked specifically that this witness be allowed to stay in the courtroom to hear the testimony regarding the officers. They objected and the court refused to allow the witness to stay in. He's had a transcript of the statement of all.
He felt that he was part of the rule and couldn't give it to him.
He has examined newspaper articles. He's examined parts of the file. Well, just ask him what he's examined then.
That's all we wanted, Mr. Tate specifically asked.
Well, ask him what he's examined.
Mr. Holmes, can you tell the court what other items you've examined in this case? Documents or...
Well, I
information that's been provided?
examined as two confessions, and I examined all of the material that you sent me in the investigative reports, and of course I've listened extensively to the tape itself. Now, are you asking me for a description of what a false confession is ordinarily? No.
Well, my question is, have you identified any of the factors that you've discussed in Mr. Misskelley's statements to the police?
Not in the quantity that I would want to see, no.
Well, can you elaborate on that?
Well, the two obvious points that bother me is the mistake on the time. You're saying 9 o'clock, then you're saying he went home at 12. I just don't understand if he was in fact involved in this crime, how he made a mistake on the time factor. And the thing that really bothers me is the ligature, what was used to tie up the victims. Now, he certainly knows the difference between shoelaces and a rope. Those are the two most prominent things, but there's a multitude of questions, in my opinion, that he should have been asked to ascertain the validity of his confession. And the first time that he came out with the wrong time factor, that should have been a signal that something was radically wrong. That's when the question should have been more probing to determine whether or not he was making it up or giving a valid confession.
What type of questions were the officers using to elicit the statement from the defendant?
Well, first of all, you don't ask any questions in the initial part of the confession. You just let them spill it and get it out, where you just sit there and you listen, a non-directive approach.
Is that what you're referring to in the
narrative? That's the way most confessions come. All of a sudden, the suspect goes belly up, or resignation sets in. They want to get it off their chest, and they just blurt it out. And there's a tremendous emotional relief. You just sit there quietly and you listen. Then when they get done discussing what happened, then the points that you want to cover, you start asking the questions. And what I didn't like about this confession is that most of it emanated from questions right off the bat, without any narrative of any length at all, without any descriptions about feelings or conversations or anything. It's all in response to questions. When it appears that it wasn't on the money, then they change it around and say, well, in effect, could it have been this way? And particularly disturbing...
I object to that statement unless he can point to a specific place in there where the officer said, could it have been this way?
Your Honor, I think it's throughout the entire statement itself.
I'm going to sustain the objection. If he's going to refer to, and if we're going to continue along those lines, I need him to be more specific in the area of the statement that he's referring to. I'll sustain the objection in that regard.
Can you mention a specific, Mr.
Both
Holmes?
of them at one time mentioned that they were disturbed by what they were hearing. One said, I'm disturbed by this time factor, and another one came right out and said, I think that, I don't remember which one, that he didn't think he was telling all of the truth. So, either he's totally innocent and just made it up and doesn't know the case facts, or 2, he was so doped up he doesn't remember what happened, or 3, he's psychologically impaired, which the ramifications are a faulty memory, or he wanted to get somebody off his back and he decided, well, I'll just give him a bunch of baloney, wrong case facts, and then recant later. There's no doubt in my mind that there's false information in the confession. The whole question is, why? Is it because he's innocent, or because he's duplicitous and cunning and decided to offer a false confession and retract it later on?
Are you aware of any literature with regard to personality traits of people who are likely to falsely confess?
Well, from reading and from my own experience, yes.
What are those?
Your Honor, at this point in time, when we start talking about personality traits, they've got a psychologist who will be here, and I anticipate he will be. This man's a 13-year law enforcement officer.
39 years, Your Honor.
13 years working for a law enforcement agency. And, Your Honor, his qualifications as to expertise as to personality traits, we do not agree that he's an expert in that area. We've agreed he's an expert in the area of interrogation. Sustained.
Mr. Holmes, is it important when you're corroborating a confession that you find things that are independent of the confession that link the suspect to the crime?
That's the whole quest of your questioning after he comes out with the narrative form of the confession, is to get something you can hang your hat on independent of what he's telling you. One other human being who can verify it, one piece of physical evidence, one piece of documentation, where you know it's irrefutable corroboration of what he tells you. Because what you're concerned about is he may recant it later on, so you want to have something that he just can't lie around. That's why you look for some irrefutable piece of evidence to corroborate the confession. And when you don't have that, you're in trouble.
Pass the witness.
Mr. Holmes, my name is Brent Davis. Met you previously at another hearing.
Yes.
If I ask you any questions that you don't understand, please ask me to rephrase them, and I'll be glad to do so.
All right, sir.
And it's my understanding that primarily what you do now is lecture to police agencies, law enforcement agencies on interrogation tactics. Is that correct?
True.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that you're basically training officers on how to conduct an interrogation?
True.
Okay. And would it be accurate to say that when you train officers to conduct interrogations, that you tell them that at a minimum, in an important case, that you want them to go 4 hours uninterrupted with a suspect?
True.
Okay. So in this particular case, the time period that the officers were with the suspect doesn't pose any problem for you, does it? That would be what you would recommend them to do if you were advising them, correct?
I would have done exactly what they did.
Okay. Now, the basis, you said that you've listened to the tape extensively. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you previously testified at another hearing in this matter and indicated you'd never heard the tape.
That's true.
Okay. And when you had never heard the tape, you said basically the same thing or rendered the same opinion as you have since you heard the tape, correct?
True.
So I assume that your opinion was already set before you even listened to the tape of Jessie Misskelley.
True.
Okay. Now, you said that there needed to be some specific fact that was unique or that could be could identify that this person was there at the crime, correct?
True.
Okay. And in a situation where a defendant describes that one of the 3 victims was castrated and is able to identify which of those 3 victims was castrated, wouldn't that indicate to you that that defendant had some
peculiar knowledge that only a person that was there would know?
Providing you know all the antecedent conditions that led up to that statement. I don't know what inferences or suggestions were made by the interrogators prior to him making that definitive statement. But if that was done, just suddenly blurted out, yes, that's significant.
Okay.
But if that was suggested in some way during hours of interrogation, then that negates its weight.
Okay. But that's one of those things that you would look for in determining whether that confession was accurate.
Absolutely.
And if the witness said, yes, one of the three victims was castrated, and that person was able to identify which one of the three was accurately, then that would be an important factor for you to consider.
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, if there were also reports from a medical examiner that there were bruising to the victim's ears, significant trauma to each one of the three little 8-year-old boys' ears, and in the course of the interrogation, the defendant tells you, upon questioning, that in fact the Parsons had grabbed the victims by their ears in the course of having them perform oral sex, that would be significant too, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but not as significant as not knowing what time the crime occurred or while they were tied up.
Okay. Well, if the parents of the little boys didn't even know that injuries had existed to their ears, and only the medical examiner and a few very limited law enforcement officers knew that, then that becomes a pretty significant finding, doesn't it?
It does, providing he can't explain how he got that information by inference or otherwise through the interrogators, and if he can't say that, then that is significant, yes.
Okay. So the only way that you would discount that information as being important would be if there was some independent source where he could have obtained that information.
Right.
Okay. Absent that independent force, that's one of those factors you're looking for to nail down that this confession is true.
Right.
Okay. Now, during an interrogation, you told us that it's important to go for at least 4 hours in an interrogation. It's also what you train officers that it's important once they're in an interrogation to keep them talking, right?
True.
Okay? So if something happens during the course of an interrogation and something comes up that may be unexpected or whatever, you don't throw your hands up and go, oh my God, you said something that was wrong. You let them keep talking and explaining what's going on, correct?
Well, not in this instance. When he comes up with the wrong time and he doesn't know what the victims were tied up with, right then you should have said to yourself, hey, wait a second, there's something wrong here. Now, why didn't they try to clarify that when they took the confession? They steered totally away from that. The minute they saw something was wrong with the time factor and the ligature, they never asked any questions to try to clarify it. Only after they turned the tape recorder off. Then they clarified the time factor in the second taping, but they omitted clarifying the difference between shoelaces and rope.
Okay. So you recall a difference between the shoelaces and rope involved in the first statement, is that correct?
Well, they didn't clarify that in the second tape. They did clarify the time factor. But, some of this stuff is minuscule, but by comparison, the time factor and the ligature, to me, is the key to this whole case.
Okay. But you say it's minuscule, but the fact that this defendant knew which of the victims had been castrated, that's pretty daggum important, isn't it?
Well, that's presumptuous to assume that emanates from guilt. That could emanate from, he may have glimpsed that through the interrogation. He was with these guys for hours. You're bound to absorb something when you're with investigators for hours. Indirectly or directly, they're going to reveal something.
Okay. So basically, when you place less significance on that, you're doing it because you're assuming that officers imparted that information to him, correct?
In this case, yes.
Okay. And the truth of the matter is you've never heard what the officer's testimony was regarding what went on there, correct?
Correct.
You've never reviewed any transcripts of what the officer said, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So as far as what went on during this interrogation process,
the only thing you know is what you've seen or heard on that tape. Is that accurate?
Your Honor, I make an objection. Prosecutor objected to the witness hearing that. We asked that the witness be allowed to hear that, and the prosecutor objected. We'd asked that he shouldn't be allowed to impeach him with that information.
I think they asked for the rule to be applied to him. I don't know why any material necessary for him to formulate an opinion couldn't have been supplied to him, if that's what you're
Well, Your Honor,
saying.
if he can't be in the courtroom and listen to him testify, how can we provide him with a transcript of it? And why should the prosecutor be allowed to impeach him on that basis? We specifically requested that Mr. Holmes be allowed to hear the testimony of the officers and formulate his opinion in this case. The state objected, and now they're trying to impeach him because he doesn't have that information before it.
Well,
I think that's improper.
Overruled. Go ahead.
Your Honor, for the record, they did have a transcript of the entire testimony of the officers that they could have provided. Now, Mr. Holmes, would you agree, let me back up just a minute. Have you talked with the defendant in this case personally?
No.
Okay, so you've never interviewed the defendant to get any gauge as to his demeanor, character, intelligence, anything of that nature?
No, the only feel I got for that was the tape.
Okay. And you would agree with the statement that a lot of people who don't have a formal education have what we call street smarts, correct?
Well, that's called social intelligence.
Right. And
Your Honor,
I
is he
think-
asking the witness to testify about things that he didn't want him to testify when I asked him questions about the psychological nature?
What is
Sounds like the same thing.
Wait a minute. I know you're trying to make an objection, but tell me what it is.
Your Honor, I asked him if people who are giving false confessions...
What is your
have a-
objection?
Your Honor, my objection is, I asked the witness if he could testify as to psychological profiles of people who give false confessions. The prosecutor objected and said that was improper, and the court sustained it. Now he's asking him the same questions.
No, I'm not allowing him to testify. I don't. Is that what you're asking him, Mr. Davis? What is
Judge,
the
it's been so long
psychological
since I asked the
profile?
question, I may have to go back and rephrase it and give Mr. Stidham an opportunity to...
Well, I'm not going to allow either one of you to ask this witness to give a psychological profile of anyone, or even a hypothetical psychological profile, unless it falls. First of all, are you prepared and capable from your experience, training, and education to give such a profile?
Yes.
Well, I might allow it.
I don't think I'm asking that question yet, Judge. Anyway. Would it be accurate to say that one of the first things you teach people to do in an interrogation is to assess the mental capability of the person they're interrogating?
You get a thumbnail sketch of the individual you're interrogating.
Okay.
You have to know his basic personality structure. Yes.
And isn't it true that when you teach your courses that you advise the people that you're teaching that you don't just look for book smarts, but you look for streetwise street smarts also?
Yes.
Okay. And they're
Mr.
two
Davis,
different...
just a minute. I'm going to allow him to ask that question. If you want to reserve your cross-examination at this point, if you want to go back and ask him that
Yes,
question,
sir,
I'm
I'm
going to
going
allow
to
it.
go back and ask him. Thank you.
You want to wait and let him do that and then continue
Yeah,
your
I
cross?
I think that'd be best, Your Honor.
Okay. Are you saying that you have developed that profile through the years of your training?
Empirically based on the false confessions that I myself have taken.
Your Honor, that...
Well, I'm going to let you give a generic, if there is one, statement of the profiles that you could expect, if that's what your question is.
That's exactly what my question is, Your Honor.
That does not relate to a specific case, gentlemen. Just a generic profile of what one would look for, if he knows.
Thank you, Your Honor. Judge, our objection would be that, as I understand it, his profile will be based on specific, a minimal number or however many specific cases he's had.
I think that...
And that will be...
Well, I've allowed him to testify as an expert in interrogations and interrogation techniques, and it's been fairly well established that he teaches police officers. So if in the course of that, if he describes for them a particular set of personality traits to look for, then I'm going to allow him to describe what they are.
Thank you, Your Honor. Could you describe those for us, Mr. Holmes?
Low IQ, highly suggestible in personality structure, intimidated when in the presence of dominant personalities, always attempting to solve the immediate stress factor, get the interrogators off my back and just let me go home, naively assumes that they can all straighten it out later on, wherein they become an agent of their own victimization. They give the police or the prosecutor a sword, and then the sword is stuck in them with their own confession. But they assume that they can go out and tell their parents or an attorney that I just made it up, and the whole thing will be straightened out. It's extremely difficult for the average person to believe that someone would confess to a crime they didn't do.
Your Honor, I'm going to have to object. Mr. Holmes is going beyond the question, and he's
I'm going to
just
sustain
talking.
the objection at this point.
Mr. Holmes, you stated that the first factor that you discussed earlier was that in a valid confession, the confessor tells you something you don't already know.
All right.
Your Honor, he's now, I think, going outside this limited area or scope.
Well, I'll let him open it back up. Go ahead.
You need me to repeat the question, Mr. Holmes?
Yeah, please.
Okay. You said that the first factor that interrogators should look for and determine whether or not they're getting a false confession is that the confessor tells you something that you don't already know. In other words,
He's just throwing back at you what he's already heard from you.
so that's a red flag.
Yeah.
Pass the witness.
When you say that he's throwing back something that he's already heard from you, you're presuming that he acquired that information from one of the interrogating officers, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you, in this case, you don't have any earthly idea if that's the situation, do you?
No.
And if, in fact, that information was not received from the interrogating officers, you would agree that the one individual being named that was castrated and the injuries to the ears would be factors that would be corroborative of a true confession.
Well, I would have looked at this kid with a fish eye the same way these investigators did. And I probably would have felt the same way they did. But the minute he came out with that wrong time of death and not knowing what the proper ligature is, that's when I would have backed off. Then I would have known, hey, there's something wrong here. And that's the only disagreement I have with these officers. I'm not in here to castigate them and their tactics because I've probably done things twice as bad as they have in my career. All I'm saying is, when they didn't resolve those things, that's when they aborted professionalism. And they should have, and I have a sense, in listening to the tape, that they had a sense that there was something wrong. And that's the reason they didn't ask more probing
Your Honor,
questions.
he's not being responsive to the question, and now we're getting way far afield in an area that he doesn't have the expertise to testify to.
All right, please answer yes or no. Then I'm going to allow you to explain your answer.
Okay.
All right.
And I just want to be sure that we're clear on this. Assuming that the officers did not impart knowledge to this defendant about the child being castrated, let's assume that as a hypothetical. Okay. Then when this defendant tells us the child and is able to pinpoint the child that was castrated, and that information is not general public knowledge, then that's one of those factors you would look for to corroborate the truthfulness of a confession, correct?
Yes.
And the same with the injury to the ears.
Yes.
So the only way that you discard that and begin to think that's not important is if you presume that the officers imparted that knowledge to the defendant.
That, and it's overwhelmed by the importance of the time factor in the rope versus the shoelaces.
So you're saying that even if this defendant is able to accurately describe the injuries to one of the three youths and describe the specific and unusual type injuries that we have here, absent police providing that information, that still isn't all that significant a factor?
Well, it is significant if it's not contaminated by anything that they said or did. That's the only qualifier I'd put on it.
Now, there's certainly nothing unusual about a defendant recanting a confession, is there?
No.
In fact, wouldn't you agree that in 99% of the cases where a defendant has confessed to a crime and they then recant, that in 99% of those cases the defendant's guilty?
Yes.
And in fact, you teach in your seminars, don't you, that you don't expect defendants to keep reiterating their confessions.
True.
In other words, once somebody tells their involvement in a crime, then you don't expect them to come back and tell other people. Correct?
Correct.
And in fact, it would be the rare exception if they did that, correct?
Correct.
So in this case, this defendant recanting his confession.
No objection, I'll go to the bench.
Percentages are like what other people are doing to innocence. That's showing other people's innocence or guilt or innocence to confirm that this client, this individual is guilty.
He's indicated his opinion.
Yes, Your Honor. They're guilty or not. Other individuals cannot be shown guilt. Mr. Misskelley, just like evidence of prior bad accident cannot show the guilt or innocence of Mr. Misskelley. I think it's the exact same thing we are. There's only that rule.
Well, I mean, I don't think he's capable of testifying whether or not the statement was true or false,
right,
or whether or not Mr. Misskelley is guilty or innocent, if that's what you're saying.
Yes, Your Honor, but I can testify. You have to listen to responses of the percentage of other people are, and so other people are not. It's not the issue in this court, Your Honor.
Well, but the issue here is this guy is an expert in interrogation and interrogation techniques, and the issue that you've raised is a false confession.
Yes, sir, I
or an
understand
untrue confession. I'm not sure you really raised that, but at least a coerced confession.
It's certainly outside the scope of direct.
I don't think so. I think don't go too far in that area, but I'm gonna allow you to pursue it.
Yeah, I'll make sure my argument's messy along with I don't about my mind that it's a 404.
404 B. That's in.
I might be out the wrong way.
I got it right here. No. I think it's 405.
Maybe, Your Honor.
That's 404.
Just like evidence of other crimes, whether it be of this defendant or another defendant, Your Honor, are not admissible to prove guilt or innocence. They're only admissible to prove what's in the rule. And it's the guilt or innocence of other individuals in Mr. Holmes' career. He's proffering the question.
But this isn't character evidence.
The way he's proffering the question is 99% of people who contest for guilt. Now, this guy's an expert in the field. Just because other people are doesn't mean this he's trying to testify.
I'm going to allow you to pursue that line of questioning, but I don't want you to attempt to elicit from him whether or not the statement was true or false, or whether or not the defendant is guilty or innocent. And I'll sustain an objection on those points.
Oh, objection. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Good, I forgot what question we were at. Was there ever a response to it?
You asked me if it was unusual for people to recant. We both agreed, no, it's not.
Okay.
And in fact, would you agree, Mr. Holmes, that there is a very brief time frame in the lives of most people who have committed a serious crime in which they will confess?
It only comes at one critical point. It's like two people come together, the chemistry is right, and he just decides, I'm going to tell this guy the truth. And he may never get that feeling again.
Okay. And in fact, after that brief moment occurs, that person may recant and deny his involvement. Is that correct?
Well, they begin to realize the consequences of what they've done, yes.
Okay. Now, sometimes you get confessions that don't quite jive with the facts that you know them to be, correct?
There's always things that are unresolved, always dangling things that you don't seem to be able to put all the pieces of the puzzle together, but not of this magnitude.
Well, in your lectures to law enforcement officers, you specifically address that area regarding matters that are unresolved or that are inconsistent concerning statements by witnesses. Do you not?
That's the nature of our existence. There's always something you can't resolve. There's always the inexplicable.
And isn't it true that in instances where a defendant makes incriminating admissions regarding his involvement, that it's your opinion that 99% of the time those people are guilty?
Your Honor, I'm sworn to raise the same objection. I feel it's a wholly improper question.
Your Honor, I'm asking him his opinion regarding that.
Your Honor, you should ask him his opinion regarding the defendant.
No, that's... The court's already ruled that's improper.
Go ahead, I'm all out. Overrule.
I agree.
Okay. So you would agree that if people make incriminating admissions regarding their involvement, then 99% of the time they're guilty?
You're telling the truth, right?
And sometimes they just give you tidbits of information. Is that correct?
Well, everybody wants to put their best foot forward, and they don't want to make themselves look bad, and they don't want to always go into the gory details of what they did. Sure, you don't always get a complete, vivid description of why they did it, the motive behind it, and etc. That's rare that you get a full disclosure. There's always things that are unresolved. But there are no major discrepancies, as, in my opinion, we have in this case.
And wouldn't you agree that it's contrary to human nature to even give a statement admitting or indicating your involvement in something as heinous as the murder of 3 8-year-old boys?
It's against the nature of most people, yes.
And that's why when somebody makes an admission regarding their involvement in such a crime, you place a great deal of weight on that. Isn't that true?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. Now, Mr. Holmes, when you testified at a previous matter involving this case, you recall what you told us the most important thing there was in determining the accuracy of a confession?
Well, are you talking about looking for something to corroborate it physically, or the emotional factor that's evident?
You recall stating that the most important thing of all is if they sound and look like they are telling the truth, then you can tell?
Yes.
Okay. And wouldn't you agree, Mr. Holmes, that in order to make that determination, and the person in the best position to make that determination is the one who's there doing the interview?
No, not in this case, because in a case of this importance, national significance, they had a vested interest in it.
So a person in a better position to make a determination in this case is someone who's never talked to the defendant
wasn't there during the confession, only listened to the tape in the last week or so, that person's in a much better position. Is that what you're telling us?
Well, I respect their opinion, but I also respect my own.
And your opinion would be different, or let me rephrase that, Your Honor. You presume, what gives you concern is because you presume the officers provided information regarding the castration of the one victim and other physical findings to the defendant during the course of the interrogation, correct?
No, what I'm concerned about is the defendant didn't provide enough information to offer a valid confession, in my opinion. That's what I'm concerned about.
Well, but you presume that the defendant was provided with that information in order to have concerns about this particular interrogation, correct?
You can guess at a lot of things. Fortune tellers do it all the time. If you're going to utter a bunch of statements, you're going to be on the money with one or two of them, just by chance alone. I'm not saying that that's the case in this situation, but that happens. You know, but what I'm concerned about are the things that are not reconciled.
Okay. So, well, really what's your job, and are you hired by the defense in this case?
I don't really know. They told me they didn't have any money and that they felt there was something wrong, and I said, well, send it down, let me take a look at it. And when
Are you submitting a bill in this case?
I haven't done it yet.
Are you intending to submit a bill?
Yeah, I'll ask for my plane fare.
You have presumed that the officers tainted the defendant's mind prior to or during the confession. Is that true?
I'm not attempting to impugn the professionalism or the integrity of these officers.
Your Honor, if he could answer my question.
Okay.
I asked him a question.
Answer yes or no, and then you can explain.
All right, let me have the question again, Constable.
Okay. Are you presuming that the officers tainted the mind of the defendant with facts and information about the crime?
Yes.
Okay. And is your job here and what you're hired to do in this case basically to second guess what the officers did?
No.
You indicated that it would be a guess regarding whether or not, excuse me, let me rephrase that. You indicated a minute ago that it could have been a lucky guess on the part of the defendant when he said that Chris Byers was the boy that was castrated and described the injury.
It's only 1 out of 3.
And also describing that type of injury to that particular individual?
Well, I don't know the antecedent conditions to that, so I really can't speculate on that.
Well, the truth of the matter, Mr. Holmes, is you aren't acutely familiar with the facts and circumstances surrounding this case. Isn't that true?
I'm acutely aware of some troubling things in the confession that I read.
Okay. Now, would you answer my question?
Yes.
You aren't familiar with the facts and circumstances surrounding this case.
Not all of them, no.
Okay. And that is vitally important in being able to ascertain whether facts given by a defendant are accurate or not, correct?
I've read thousands of confessions, and this is just one more confession that I've read in 39 years. So,
well, I appreciate you providing that information to us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you would you answer my question? Now, that information, the details of this case, if you're going to be able to determine whether this confession, how accurate it was, or to judge it, or to weigh it, it's important to have a good grasp of the facts and circumstances surrounding this case, correct?
Correct.
And you admit that you don't have that acute awareness regarding the facts and circumstances of this particular case?
No, I don't admit that at all.
We ask that the witness be allowed to hear the officer's testimony, and the prosecution objected to that.
What have you reviewed in the way of records? Have you got those with you? The records that you reviewed in preparation?
I've reviewed enough to prompt me to come up here and testify.
Okay. Have you got with you those documents and records that you reviewed prior to coming here and testifying?
I got the copies of the two confessions that were taken from him, yes.
Okay. And what other documents did you review?
Well, I listened to the tape.
Okay. And what did you do besides listen to the tape and review the two confessions?
Well, you know what else I did.
Okay. Did you also review any of the investigative reports?
No.
Did you review any of the statements of other witnesses?
Yeah, I'm aware that the defense has a lot of alibi witnesses. I'm aware that there were other suspects in this crime. I'm aware of a lot of things.
Did you review those statements?
No.
I assume since you say you're aware of them, you were fed that information by the defendant's attorneys?
Yes.
Okay. And as far as information from the medical examiner's office, have you ever reviewed any of that information?
I read the psychological profile of the defendant. I don't think I read the autopsy, no.
Okay. And you haven't been provided a transcript of that, of the medical examiner's testimony here at trial?
No.
Okay. So as far as his physical findings, you have no real working knowledge of what he found in his autopsy report?
No.
Okay. And therefore no way of determining whether the statements or confessions jive with what his findings were in that autopsy report? 1 second, John.
Was that you didn't answer, you just nodded your head.
Well, it was kind of an elongated question. I was trying to figure out at what point I should respond now.
All right.
He wants to reiterate the confession.
I'll pass the witness.
Okay.
Pass the witness. We have no further questions. Judge, I did think, well,
Go ahead.
1 second. No further questions.
Are y'all both sure you got all you want out of him? Because after I let him go, I assume he's leaving. All right, sir, you're free to go.
Yeah, thank you very much.